Great, thanks so much. We always start out with visitors' comments. Do we have any visitors in the queue out there?
We didn't receive any requests for testimony today, and I don't see anybody from the public online.
Great. Since this is recorded, I would mention that one of our fine mayors is in a hospital room. He had a little bit of a heart issue, but he's here with us, masked and willing to participate. So he's waving. And then we had some other sort of bad news. Steve, do you want to talk about what you're telling me?
Oh, sure. So former Cornelius Mayor Ralph Brown, I don't know if it's bad news, it's just news at this point. But Ralph, who is 76 and is having some memory issues, was reported missing, last night at about 6 or 6:30. So, there's Washington County, released I guess just kind of an awareness notice, for folks to be aware of him, to watch for him and to keep their eyes out. And so I would say while you're keeping your eyes open, also, open your hearts and say a little prayer for him and Carol, as she's, waiting to find out where he is and for Ralph to be located safely. So.
Well, it is sad news. I've known Ralph a long time. I remember when he was a principal there with you, probably in Hillsborough, and did a fine job with Mayor and Cornelius. I'm sure concerned over there about him and where he's at. Okay.
So, yeah, we've pushed out the notices over Facebook and all the social media networks and Washington County Sheriff. So we're just hoping somebody, finds him hanging out somewhere having coffee or something and tells him, hey, you need to go home. Let's help him find his home. So we're doing what we can to help Carol find Ralph.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that with us, Steve. So,
and I know Pete's been, involved in that. I had his pulse on that, or his finger on that pulse as well. So.
All right. Well, thank you much.
And Commissioner, before we get going too, I did want to note we have Councilor Ackerval from Wilsonville. I've promoted her to a panelist. I don't believe we have Mayor Fitzgerald online yet.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi there,
Welcome.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Kristen Ackerval, and I'm happy to sit in until Mayor Fitzgerald is able to join.
Great. Thank you for being with us. We appreciate it. So anything else in the change in attendance, Steve?
I think we're okay. We'll get attendance off the Zoom meeting here.
Alrighty. We have consideration of the meeting minutes for April the 12th of 21. Have you had a chance to review those? And if you have and they're acceptable, we'll get a motion to approve. I think Gary said he approved.
I so move. Yes.
Is there a second? Okay. Heard the second. I didn't know, was that?
I think three of us said second at one time.
Okay. Well, Stephen, pick somebody, whoever you like.
All right. Well, I'll go with Mayor Jones.
All right. Thank you. Any discussion at all on those minutes? And all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any dissenters? Great. Thank you. We're done with that item. On number 4, as you're following along, these are the R1 Act nominations, and why we're somewhat in a hurry to do those is because of their meeting schedule. As you probably know,
I'm sorry. I was just going to let you know, Councilor Ackerval had her hand up.
Yep, please.
Thank you. I apologize for the interruption. I was just informed that, in fact, Mayor Fitzgerald is on the call, but is not able to access this part of the meeting room. And so if she's able to hop in, then I will excuse myself back to the listening portion of the meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think we have her. Do we have you now, Mayor Fitzgerald?
Now I seem to be in the meeting.
All right. Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
Ackerval.
Again, sorry for
no, thank you for pretending.
I didn't know how to knock on the door. Thank you, Councilor Ackerval.
Okay, back to the R1 Act nominations. We have 2 appointments coming up, and why we were in somewhat of a hurry is because the Act only meets every other month. And so it'll be a meeting coming up in June. And then if we don't make some nominations for 2 vacant positions, then it won't come back up until August. And so we're trying to make certain that we don't have any lapses in nominations and people serving. There are 2 positions officially up and one that's going to be coming up. The 2 that are officially up are ones held by Pete Truax, who would, for those of you who don't know, he was appointed about 5-6 months ago. He's fairly new. The act is fairly new, by the way, but he's fairly new. And the other one's by Steve Calloway. And Steve took a position about 2-3 years ago. The other position, which will be coming up, is for Pam Treese. And the act definitely wants somebody from the business community. Pam has elected to leave WEA, as I understand, at the end of July. It was going to be December. Now it's going to be the end of July. And so we won't have a business representative. So the purpose of this meeting is to take nominations from this group. Again, we have 2 for sure, they're up. And then we have 1 that we should probably replace because by the time that Pam resigns, is no longer eligible to serve. It'll be August and we'll need to go through that process. So I'll throw it open. Are there any nominations for the ACT positions currently held by Pete and Steve? Oh, I'm sorry that I can see the hand up from Keith.
Thanks, Roy. Yeah, I'd like to nominate Pete and Steve to be local representatives again, elected representatives again. And on the business side, for consideration, I'd like to nominate Kristen Leichner, the president of Pride Disposal.
I will second all of those nominations.
Thank you. But let's take any other nominations. And I see, well, your hand's going to go down. Okay, Mark, please.
Yeah, the city of Beaverton. I think we mentioned this at the last time this came up as well. We would like to nominate the executive director of our downtown association, a gentleman named Kevin Teeter, who has spent quite a bit of time working with the local business community in this area, and has recently been installed as a member of our planning commission. So he has a hand in transportation matters in the Beaverton area and would certainly love to contribute his insight on transportation matters to the broader Washington County area.
Thank you, Mark. Are there other nominations? Gary, were you putting, no, you weren't putting your hand up. To say anything. Okay. How I'd like to.
No, Jerry's got his hand up.
Gary does?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes. Did we get a second? We got a second on.
I didn't take the second because I was taking nominations.
Okay. All right. In which case, then I would like to put in for nomination the past mayor of Tualatin, Lou Ogden, for the R1 Act seat being vacated by Pam. As most of you know, Lou is a long-term serving member as mayor of Tualatin. He's been a private business owner for over 30 years in Tualatin and Washington County. He has very close associations with the Chamber of Commerce, not only in Tualatin, but throughout the cities of Washington County. Lou's been involved extensively over the years in issues dealing with transportation in Washington County. And I think that he probably comes with probably the best governmental resume and the biggest Rolodex, if I can use that dated term, of anybody so far nominated. However, I want to caveat that by saying I will be totally in support of whomever we decide to nominate today to replace Pam. But I'm placing Lou's name in contention for that position.
Thank you, Gary. I'm not sure, I'm not old enough to know what a Rolodex is, but I understood the rest of what you said.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to clarify that. You look like you might not know what a Rolodex is.
Yeah, thank you. Are there, I think the way we want to do this is we've had at least 3 nominations for the business representative. Are there any other nominations at all? Seeing none, and I'm sorry I didn't take the second, but Keith, but could we have at least the nominations for the two mayors, unless there's others? Is that fine with you? You'll nominate. It would be Steve and Pete for those two.
Yeah,
positions?
from a motion standpoint, yeah, Roy, I'd be happy to move that we support Pete and Steve to serve again on R1 Act.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to second that.
All right, the last chance. Are there any other nominations for those two positions? Hearing none, all in favor, then raise your hand or say aye.
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 Are there any in opposition? Okay, that was unanimous. So we have three nominees, one from Tualatin, one from Beaverton, and I understand the other one is from Sherwood. And so Keith, I see your hands up.
Yeah, just a quick note for those, many of you know Kristen. Like I said, she is the president of Pride Disposal. She's been very involved for many years with the Tigard Chamber and the Sherwood Chamber of Commerce. She is actually on the board of the Sherwood Chamber right now. She has been in the industry for close to 20 years, current board of the Association of Oregon Recyclers and vice chair of the board of the Oregon Refuse and Recycling Association. So I think she'd do a wonderful job, provide some diversity on the R1 Act and give some regional balance within our county. So.
Keith, just out of curiosity, has somebody reached out to Kristen? I know her as well, but
yeah, she's excited about the idea. She would be honored if
okay. Don't want to surprise anybody.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And Jason, I see your hands up too.
I just want to support that nomination in particular. I think that she would be an excellent addition. I think having someone that's in the mode of actually operating a business, I would strongly encourage us to think about that in a business at that has a significant both impact and need to use the transportation systems in the area. And certainly, one of their primary service areas is the city of Tigard, and Pride Disposal does a fabulous job and is a well-managed, led organization by her.
Thank you, Jason. So just throwing it out, how do you want to proceed? We have three nominations. We can either vote by hands or by voicemail, or either Mark or Gary, have you changed your minds at all on your nominations? No?
I hadn't really thought about it, and because we're just hearing about candidates right now for the very first time, so it's a little bit of a challenge to sort it out. I do think that while Kevin Teeter would be a great representative, I think Kristen Leichner would probably do a fine job as well. I prefer to see somebody who's actually out working in the business community, and so I would support one of those two.
Good. Gary, you had made a comment about Lou, and is there anything you want to add?
I would just add that for those of you who are not familiar with part of what the Region 1 Act is looking at in terms of our agenda for the coming year, you all are familiar with the fact that the state is dedicating money for the expansion of I-5 on the Rose Quarter and for monies for the I-205 Abernathy Bridge and the I-5 Boone Bridge. And if you all note, that money goes to Multnomah County and to Clackamas County. The Region 1 Act is made up, in addition to those two counties, Hood River County and Washington County, neither of which are scheduled for any type of big dollar projects with regard to transportation. So part of my rationale for Mayor Ogden is that if there were somebody who I would like to have cover the back of Washington County in terms of advocating and watching for monies well spent and potentially monies that could be going to Washington County, I think that Mayor Ogden would be certainly a terrific advocate for us as a county.
Gary, I too am pleased to hear so many people are nominated. I didn't realize that there would be as many, but that's great. So the only way I can see to sort this out, if we're going to again try to get somebody in place so we don't have a vacancy before we know it, is to simply accept, if that's all right, all three of these as nominees, and then vote, and we'll see the highest vote getter will be appointed. Is that acceptable to everyone?
Yeah, it's kind of difficult, Roy, to do a paper ballot or a secret ballot.
Well, I will take your paper ballot if you've got it available, but I don't know how you're going to reach it through the screen.
Pete's got his hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Pete. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm glad that it's not a secret ballot. I think we ought to be out there, and public ought to know exactly what we're and how we're voting on this particular issue. I think that's crucial. Secret ballots are for other offices, and other organizations, not for this.
Can I also suggest that perhaps you take a first round of votes and let the person who gets the least votes drop out, and then take another vote between the remaining two?
I think that's a good idea. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Is that acceptable to everyone? And then we'll get down to 2. Everybody's thumbs up? Okay. All right. I have no easier way to do this because we can't, I mean, it's awkward over the internet here, but if we would just kind of go around the room and vote, then we'll know exactly where those votes are. And I would either, Stephen, you or Chris, if you just kind of tell him, we'll know who the top 2 might be. And on my screen, I'm just going to go across people I see. And Pete, unfortunately or fortunately, you're the first one.
So I'll go with Kristen.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie?
Kristen.
Okay, thank you. Mark?
Kevin Teeter.
Kevin, thank you. Jeff?
Kristen.
Kristen? Ken?
Kristen.
Thank you. Gary?
Lou.
Lou, thank you. Jason?
Kristen.
Thank you. Steve?
I support the nomination of Kristen.
Thank you. Frank?
Kristen.
Thank you. Keith?
Kristen.
Thank you. And Julie?
Kristen, thank you.
Can you indicate the votes, please?
Looks like we have 9 for Leichner and 1 each for Ogden and Teeter.
I'm guessing you don't need a second vote.
Well, unless we want it, because I failed to vote too, and I would be happy to support either Kristen or Lou. I know them both, but Kristen I think is a good option.
Roy, if it's appropriate at this time, then I would like to move that we make it unanimous and cast all of our ballots for Kristen Leichner.
I'll second that.
There's been a motion, there's been a second. All in favor of that, say aye.
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 Anybody in opposition? Thank you, everyone. So what we'll do is we'll notify the, Chris, I can do that or you can do that. Probably you're in touch with them as well. We'll just notify the R1 Act that we will be making these nominations, and we'll also let Pam know. Thank you for the service. She knows it's coming, and she doesn't know who. And so we'll thank her as well. Well, thank you
Commissioner
guys.
Rogers, we can send out a letter from WCCC that's what we've done before, is we submit a letter for your signature with not WCC's nomination, so we can get that off to them.
Yeah, sooner the better. Thank you. All right, so we've dispensed with that issue. We're going down to our presenter, which would be Aaron Wardell and Jessica Phelps. And you're going to speak to us a little bit about the urban reserves, which I know Hillsborough and King City and Beaverton probably are all interested in.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. My name is Erin Wardell. I'm the Principal Transportation Planner for Washington County. I am going to turn most of this presentation over to Jessica Pels, who is a senior planner and our project managers for this work. But I did want to point out for the mayors before we get started that this project would not have been possible without the support and the coordination of staff at all of the cities in Washington County that have urban reserves available. They've provided invaluable technical expertise to us, as well as a good understanding of the city's preliminary priorities for their urban reserve areas. Coming out of this project, we've produced a number of products relating to infrastructure improvements, costs of infrastructure, and financing options for infrastructure that we hope will prove valuable and provide certainty as the cities move forward with concept plans for their urban reserve areas. And with that, I will turn it over to Jessica.
All right, thanks, Erin. All right, next slide. So we know you're all familiar with this, but we've been doing this presentation for a while, and it's just good to have a refresher of where the urban reserves are located. So for this, we wanted to show this map. The blue areas, of course, are the urban reserve areas. And the big question we wanted to answer with this study was, how will future development of these urban reserve areas impact the Washington County transportation system? Next slide, please. We did get a Metro grant for this work of $420,000. And again, our whole impetus for the study was to sort of get ahead of future development in urban reserves. So we hear a lot about traffic congestion from development happening in new urban areas. And we know that there's a lot of demand for housing. And we wanted just to know, how can we best help the cities with concept and comprehensive planning so we can have the best information available to help guide that work? So with the study, we wanted to analyze, where do we need additional capacity for motor vehicle capacity? We're assuming bike and pedestrian improvements on all of our new roads that we're planning. And then how can we help the cities? And so, as Erin alluded to, the outcomes from this study were really products that the cities can use in concept and comprehensive planning, as well as some transportation system plan amendments for the county's TSP to enable that infrastructure that we're going to need. Next slide. I won't go through all of these in detail, the accomplishments, but just to say, we were so proud of all the work that we did with this study. We coordinated a lot with our technical advisory committee, which included city staff, agency staff, the special districts like Clean Water Services, Metro. We had a great stakeholder group, which included Thousand Friends of Oregon, Home Builders Association of Metro Portland, the Department of Agriculture, and Department of Land Conservation and Development. And we did take them on a driving tour of all the reserves, which was really great and super interesting. We also did a lot of community outreach to various community groups, including the city councils of Tigard, Tualatin, and Beaverton, a few of the CPOs in Washington County, Neighborhood Association in Beaverton. We've kind of been doing the road show for this. As part of the project, we developed land use assumptions and travel demand modeling. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then we did use some of our project budget to do engineering feasibility analysis of some transportation system plan identified projects, and those feed into some of our recommended TSP amendments. So I'll go through that in a little more detail. Next slide, please. So to kick off the project, we really had to first determine what the land use assumptions were going to be for each urban reserve. So we worked with the cities and refined the numbers. We actually started with Metro's 2018 Urban Growth Report, and then refined the numbers where we had concept plans already existing or preliminary concept plans. And then in some cases, just refined the numbers working directly with cities. So out of a total of around 8,000 acres, we're forecasting around 31,000 dwelling units and 13,000 employees. Next slide, please. Now, the land use assumptions provided the basis for the travel demand modeling, so that can inform us the number of trips we're going to expect from each urban reserve area and how those trips might impact the system. We started adding some additional projects to the system when it became clear that we were going to be seeing quite a bit of congestion from development in the urban reserves, which I think we can all expect that. So this map shows where we analyzed a few additional projects to see if those helped mitigate the the traffic from the future developments. Next slide. Another thing we found was that infrastructure is really important, or really expensive and important. One thing we did for this project was create for each urban reserve area a project list. And this includes projects from the Regional Transportation Plan, the Washington County Transportation System Plan, proposed new collectors from the Metro Urban Growth Report, and projects identified from this study and from the Cooper Mountain Transportation Study, which was a precursor to this. Then we did this initial cost estimating, either from the cost estimates already included in one of those documents, or at a rough cost of around $2,500 per lineal foot, which corresponds to what we're seeing in capital projects now. We really wanted to do this to get a good idea of how expensive is the infrastructure going to be for these urban reserve areas. And so that will help with our future planning so that we know what needs to happen in order to adequately prepare for development. Next slide, please. So the two main products that came out of this study for the cities to use, and how the study will get implemented, is the cities will use these products in the future for their concept of comprehensive planning. And those include an infrastructure analysis summary report. And as the name says, it basically summarizes all the analysis from the study. And it also includes a profile sheet for each urban reserve area that includes a map, information for future concept of comprehensive planning, sort of things to keep in mind, this project list of transportation improvements needed for each reserve, and the estimates that went into all those planning efforts. We also got an infrastructure funding plan toolkit. This was developed by Echo Northwest. It's really great. It is basically like a textbook of infrastructure funding, which is super great. I mean, it's super dense, but really interesting and really comprehensive. And then finally, we have the transportation system plan amendments. And the reason those are important is it helps us preserve the future right-of-way so that these road improvements can get built along with development or as a future capital project. Next slide, please. Oh yes, this is in more detail about the infrastructure analysis summary report. So I already said all these things, so we can go to the next slide. And then the finance plan toolkit, it's on our website. It's really great tool. It has the regulatory framework process. It has ideas for revenue projections, strategies to consider, and then interactive templates, which are really great sort of worksheets where you can plug in your own numbers for infrastructure project needs. And outside of transportation, even includes water, sewer, parks, stormwater. So it's really useful. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to go through the proposed transportation system plan amendments that arose from this study. I'll go through each one. We have a map for each one, so we won't go through this list here, but we'll run through the maps. Next slide, please. This is the Shackelford Road extension. This is through Bethany West Urban Reserve. Part of the work, as I said, was engineering feasibility analysis for existing line work that's already adopted into the TSP. This is an example of that. The existing line adopted in the TSP is the green dash. Our engineering analysis showed that the preferred alignment would be this dark dashed line. It makes for better sight distance at 185th and crosses this wet area at a better angle. Next slide. Now this would be a new road extension. This is Cornelius Pass Road Extension. This was identified through first the Cooper Mountain Transportation Study and then also modeled in the Urban Reserve Transportation Study. This helps create a continuous network of Cornelius Pass Road all the way up to 26 and beyond. Next slide. This is Southwest 185th Avenue Extension. This area was identified in the Washington County Transportation System Plan as a refinement area. That it means an area where we think we need a transportation project, but we're not sure of the exact alignment. So we did use some of the funds from this study to do some feasibility analysis, and this was the alignment chosen. These are actually intersections, not necessarily roundabouts, although they show as big circles. And the reason for this improvement would be to extend the arterial network and provide a parallel route to, this is 175th here. So it'd be 175th and 170th to the east here. So this is 185th would provide a parallel route there in the Cooper Mountain area. Next slide, please. This is Grabhorn Road curbs realignment. This is primarily a safety project, although we are working really closely with City of Beaverton on their Cooper Mountain Community Plan. They're doing comprehensive planning for this area in dashed blue that was brought into the Metro urban growth boundary with the 2018 decision. So they are incorporating this in their plans as well. Next slide. This is 175th Avenue Kink. We call this the Kink. I'm sure many of you have driven through here, and it's the really tight corner here. In our transportation system plan, we had adopted a straight line improvement here as shown in the red dash. The engineering analysis showed that the softening of this kink was the better alignment for topography. And so we would be adopting that refined curve. Next slide. This is an existing local road. This is Tile Flat Road. Here's Clark Hill Road. This is Shoals Ferry Road. This part of Tile Flat Road is already designated as arterial. This is a local road. We would like to redesignate this portion here as a collector. That makes it, when it becomes part of the whole network, you'll see, I'll talk about this one down here in a minute. But we've got south of Shoals Ferry Road will have a Tile Flat extension, and I'll talk about that in a future slide. And then you can see the Cornelius Pass Road extension north of Farmington Road. So this just helps provide that complete connection. Next slide. And here is the Tile Flat Road extension. And this provides parallel capacity to Roy Rogers 175th and helps provide that network for travelers wanting to go more north and west. Next slide. And the Basalt Creek Parkway extension. We already have this road identified in our transportation system plan in the red dashed line. We use the engineering feasibility analysis to refine that alignment to the dark dashed line. Next slide. And I think that's all we have for you. So we're happy to answer questions about our study.
Yeah, Jason, I think you're first. I think it was Jason, and then Kit, you can. Yeah.
So I couldn't help but notice that the Tile Flat extension was the only one that seemed like it was much vaguer than the others in sort of the space. I don't know if that's on purpose. I know that, at least in the City of Tigard's case, we've been concerned about and have given a lot of feedback, including at Aaron's presentation or both of your presentations to the Tigard City Council. And I guess I just want to make sure that I voice that here and also clarify, is that why that one doesn't have an actual line and it's some big, looks like a blob?
Yeah, so do you want to go ahead, Jessica?
Oh, I was just going to say that's a great question. And the reason it's shown as a corridor is because it is in rural land now, and we have to get a statewide goal exception for it. And when you do that, you adopt it as a corridor because you're not exactly sure where the alignment will go. But we are planning to work very closely with Tigard staff to determine that line work.
And that was what I was going to add to that, is that as the city is currently doing the comprehensive planning for River Terrace West, we were waiting a little bit so that we could line up with the line work as the city will be showing it as a part of the comprehensive plan. So we're working really closely with Tigard staff on that before we show an actual line on the map. When we take it to the Board of Commissioners for the TSP, we'll be refining that.
Thank you. And just to reemphasize for the elected officials that are here, there's some very specific City of Tigard desires and needs out of that. And I appreciate the county staff working on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah, we had the similar problem in Tualatin with the 124th, and as you see it now and going, and in the region, whenever you have these corridors, you have to sit there and not predetermine the exact location, if you're going to get federal funds or you're going to get state funds. And so it's always going to be a swatch until it's redefined. I think it was Ken who had his hand up. Yeah, please.
And just to piggyback on what Jason just talked about, King said he has an interest in what's going on with Tile Flat Road and connection toward Beef Bend as well. But on your slide that shows the urban reserve and the estimated total cost, Beef Bend South needs to be changed to Kingston Terrace. That is now the official designator for Beef Bend South. So Kingston Terrace is what it should be.
Okay,
Right.
noted. Thank you.
Thank you for reminding us of that. We'll update it for future presentations.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions? Please, Dave.
Roy, I'm not sure if you said my name, so if I'm.
I did.
Okay, good. I didn't want
Yeah, I did. I'm sorry.
Thank you, both of you, for the report, but also for all of the work that's gone into this. And, and thank you, just good information. And it helps bring some sense to the farm roads, if you will, the unincorporated roads that I, find myself on from time to time. So it's good to, get that holistic picture. I just wanted to say thanks for the Cornelius Pass Road extension, which, will be going, at this point from Rosedale down to, Farmington and Clark Hill. That's certainly going to be important, with the north-south connection into the employment center in North Hillsborough, North County. So thank you very much for that.
Keep in mind, it's way oversubscribed, and so you're going to keep your eye on Miss Tipwitz. That presentation is going to come up in a bit, but money is going to be the challenge. So I think Garrett was next, and then Mark.
Well, thank you. Just a quick question to Jessica. I assume I can find that report online, and if I have some questions, and I do have a couple just clarifications, do I address them to you? And your thing is jessica.peltz@washingtoncounty.org?
Yep, absolutely. We have a website, and my email is actually Jessica_Peltz at co.washington.or.us. And I think our website is on the WCCC agenda page.
Okay, I couldn't find the agenda, so that's why I asked.
Great. Maybe you can send it to him so he has it. That would be great.
Definitely. Yes, I can email it to you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And Mark, please.
Yeah, all the maps look fine, and we have the one humorous note that we no longer have any urban reserves for Beaverton. They've all been adopted as part of the urban growth boundary. But with respect to the estimates of cost of all of these things, were those cost estimates based on the right-of-way requirements of 3-lane profiles in all the rural roads, or were there opportunities to look at 2-lane profiles for significant portions of the extent of some of these rural road to urban road conversions?
That's a great question. I'm pretty sure that we do not estimate for 2-lane roads. I think we count them as 3-lane roads, but there are center turn lanes as needed, not necessarily through the whole profile. So I don't know if I can answer in detail on the cost estimating of a certain one. But
my reaction to seeing a number like 1.3 billion is what other designs could we consider that might be less expensive in terms of cost of right of way in particular, as well as construction and materials costs and maintenance costs and things like that. So, perhaps there are alternative treatments for left turns at certain locations that don't require the entire 2-mile corridor to be a 3-lane profile and so on, things like that. I don't know what the right answer is, but 1.3 billion is pretty intimidating.
It is a really big number, and more something that as cities go into the comprehensive planning phase and looking at the finance toolkit that we put together for them, they can start thinking about places where they can be more efficient. One of the concerns, though, is that as we look at these urban reserve areas, we realize that there's a lot of topography challenges and there's a lot of wetlands challenges. And so it's not always the width of the road that's making these expensive. It's the fact that it requires structure, or it's going to require a lot of remediation. So it's going to be expensive, I think, no matter what we do.
Thank you.
Great question, though. Is there anyone else? All right, well, thank you for your presentation. We'll jump over then, and Chris, I think you and Stephen are doing the MSTFP overview.
Right. So yeah, I'll kick us off for the first portion here, if we can get the presentation up, and then Chris will take over about halfway through. Okay. All right. So go ahead and go to the next slide for me. So really, we have a sort of a two-part briefing for you. We actually had intended to come to you, I think it was in March initially, with a little bit of an overview of the MSTIP program. And for a couple of different reasons, we weren't able to get that presentation in. So we're sort of covering that overview portion. We know we have a number of elected officials that haven't been around even since the last MSTIP program was approved in 2016. And certainly not too many around since the program started back in 1986. So we want to just sort of give a little overview of the program, some of the history, and how well it has served us as a community. And then we'll start talking a little bit about our proposed work plan for allocating the next round of MSTIP funding, what we're calling MSTIP 3F at this point. And we're open to naming suggestions if you have better ideas. That's a pretty opaque way of referring to the program. So what Chris will walk us through is really the approach that we've lined out to the work program, and we've shared that with our Board of Commissioners last week, and then also a proposed kind of milestones and schedules to just start framing that next allocation process. And then we want to just obviously talk about how we're engaging with you all during this process as well going forward. Next slide. So really quickly, MSTIP, it's an acronym for Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program, and it is essentially the county using countywide property tax revenues to improve the countywide transportation system. So historically, that has focused on major roads, given that it's a countywide program. And it has historically operated on a pay-as-you-go approach. So we collect revenues and then expend the funds as we have them. We do allocate funding in advance of actually having received the funding, and so we are allocating future revenues is really what this next process is about. Since the program was first implemented in 1986, we've actually funded more than 150 different road improvement projects and allocated more than $900 million during that now 35-year period. And typically, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a coming slide here, but the board has been approving allocations for MSTIP on a roughly 5-year cycle. Next slide. So what is the WCCC's role in the program? So the Washington County Coordinating Committee, you all, are asked to provide input on program criteria, input on projects, as we get to that stage in the process of actually identifying project candidates and potential programs within the MSTIP allocations. And then ultimately, you'll be asked to forward a recommendation on the final funding allocation to the Board of County Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners ultimately has the authority to adopt the funding program. And then obviously you all are advised by the WCCC TAC, the Transportation Advisory Committee. And their function, again, is just to provide that technical support to this process. So providing input to the county team that's working on the MSTIP projects in terms of project candidates, helping with evaluation and prioritization. And then ultimately the TAC will make a recommendation then to you all that would inform your recommendation to the board. Next slide. So this is a really old graphic, but I thought it is useful in terms of providing a little bit of context. So the county, starting back in the 1980s when MSTIP was initially formed, we adopted this idea of a three-leg stool for how we fund our transportation system. So property taxes is MSTIP, and you can see that in the red box there. And this was probably updated last in about 2000, well, yeah, probably mid 90s actually. So MSTIP 1, 2, and 3 had been adopted at that point. So that's largely how we fund capacity and safety improvements. That's one of the big pots of money for that. Throughout the county, we also do have development fees. So that is now the TDT, but at the time it was the traffic impact fee, the TIF. And so we collect fees from developers. And I think it's really important to note too, developers also build a lot of the infrastructure that we need. So between development or improvements, I should say, constructed by developers and the fees that developers pay, that does represent a really important part of how our system gets constructed here. And then finally, for the county, at least, we primarily rely on gas taxes. So we have a countywide 1 cent gas tax that gets shared with the cities. Our vehicle registration fee also shared with the cities. And then we all get a share of state highway fund distribution. So at the county, we rely mostly on that revenue to help maintain the existing system. So we have the property taxes and developer improvements and fees for most of the, what I'll call the capital improvements. And then we focus the gas tax mostly on maintenance and then some smaller capital type projects, pedestrian improvements, ADA, that sort of thing. Next slide. So this graphic, it has quite a bit of info on here too. And as we were presenting it last week, the chair advised us to pause a little bit here. So I'm going to take that advice. But we thought this was a really useful graphic. And what it's trying to depict here is that as you think about how you design or you plan, design, and build your transportation system, this sort of outlines some of the key steps in that process. So the first arrow at the top is the transportation system plan. So that's really stepping way back and just thinking about, okay, as we're developing our land use plans for our community, what are the transportation improvements that we need to support that? And the study that we just heard about, the Urban Reserve Transportation Study, is a good example of some system level planning that's taking place. Then you've got to figure out, okay, we have a certain amount of funding available to us. So now we have to start prioritizing. So the needs that are identified in our countywide transportation system plan or the regional transportation plan or probably any of your city transportation plans, there's obviously a lot more need than there is funding available to implement all of that. And so this MSTIP allocation process really is this project selection arrow. So again, how do we want to implement the plan with the funding that we have available? What are those most important priorities or things that add the most value to the system? And then subsequently, after projects have been identified and selected, then we jump down to project development. So that's really getting at more specifically the design and working out the specific details of the alignment. Do we need a bridge or a culvert? All that sort of stuff. And then you start jumping into finally the project delivery phase. So that's doing your final design and then actually bidding and building the projects. And I would just note too, Joe Yonkins is also on the call. Joe is our capital projects division manager. So just wanted to acknowledge that he's on the call as well with us today. And his team obviously plays a huge role in these last three arrows here. So next slide, please. So a little bit of history about MSTIP. So as I mentioned earlier, it started in 1986 with the voters approving a serial levy, a 3-year serial levy. It was a small number. And I actually just read a little history here recently and realized that this was the second vote for a levy. There was an initial larger vote that failed, I believe in 1985. And then so a scaled down version was put in front of the voters for, I think, about $27 million in 1986. And that had a little over 50% approval, so it passed. And we set about delivering those projects. Turned out to be a pretty successful program, and it was we renewed twice in 1989 and 1995 with additional voter-approved serial levies. And the 1989 and 95 packages were progressively larger than the initial one. And then a little bit of a twist of fate, but a very good one, as it turned out, was through ballot measures 5, 50, and 47. There were these various property tax measures that came before the voters. And one of the net results of that was that the MSTIP 3 serial levy rate that was in effect in 1997 was reduced and then essentially rolled into a new county-based property tax rate at that point. And so since 1997, MSTIP funding really comes from just a portion of the county's countywide property tax revenues. And since that change has occurred, then the Board of Commissioners has actually approved 4 different subsequent multi-year programs. So we had MSTIP, we started assigning these letter designations at that point. So we had 3B, C, D, and E. The most recent one, MSTIP 3E, was approved in 2016. And I'll talk a little bit more about that coming up in the future. I also want to be a little bit clear too, as we're talking about these funding allocations, just as an example, we talk about a 5-year funding allocation. I want to be really clear that that doesn't mean that all of the projects that are approved in a particular funding package will be constructed in that 5-year period. It just means that we're allocating revenues over a 5-year period to projects that will be delivered on potentially a longer schedule. And so I think as we look at this list here, we actually, I think, have just completed maybe our last MSTIP 3C project not too long ago. And we still have 1 or 2 MSTIP 3D projects that for a variety of reasons are still in the hopper. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the status of some of the MSTIP 3E projects. And we're sort of in the midst of the MSTIP 3E cycle right now. Next slide. So results. This program has been really transformational in many ways for Washington County. It has really allowed us to start building out the transportation system, as I mentioned earlier. The nature of the program has been to sort of focus on major roadways or roads of countywide significance. We'll come back to that again just a little bit. But I want to be clear too, and not just vehicular capacity, but that vehicular capacity supports transit. We've added an awful lot of bicycle and pedestrian improvements over time. I know we come into some criticism about the quality of those facilities, but at least we have been able to construct some facilities, and then obviously over time we have the capability to layer on additional enhancements to that system as funding and needs warrant that. And so we've also created a lot of jobs. We bid these projects back to local contractors. They hire subcontractors. We also contract out a lot of the design work for these projects to local firms. And so again, we're actually investing a lot of that money back into our communities in a variety of different ways. We've really improved access. People are able to get to work and get to school and get to the places that they live their lives. And so I think you know, that really is important to have a good transportation backbone in place. And again, leveraged development opportunities. I give a lot of credit to the cities and our folks at the county. We've been really successful working with developers to try to leverage the improvements that they're making along, in some cases, with public funds, or just the fact that we actually have a more well-built and robust transportation system that actually helps to keep us economically competitive when a company is looking for places to expand or construct a new business. That's an attractive amenity for them as well. And again, we have grown a lot since 1986. So we have actually grown by about 326,000, more than doubled our population. And our jobs have also more than doubled. So we're at about 256,000 jobs added just in that about looks like about a 28-year period. And so that capacity and the safety improvements that we've invested in our system have really helped us to support that rapid growth. Next slide.
Wait, before you do that, Stephen, can
Yes,
you
sir.
go back to that one just for a minute? There's been some conversation about whether or not our projects match up with low income and disadvantaged populations. And you really point out well where these investments have been made and how they do align. Would you say a few things about that?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I skipped right over that talking point, but yeah, so this map that you see, the blue areas, this is metro mapping. And so they've undertaken an exercise of mapping various equity areas. And so the darker blue areas are where you tend to have more overlap between concentrations of people of color, limited English proficiency, or low income. And then sort of the medium blue, people of color or limited English proficiency. And these are based on census tracts and areas that maybe have a higher than average concentration of these various populations. And then the lightest blue color are areas where you have a higher proportion of lower incomes than the regional average as well. And so I think what the commissioner was pointing out is that you can see that a lot of the improvements have been in those areas. And, you know, I think, again, as we've mentioned earlier, it does help improve access to transit or the ability to provide efficient transit service in some cases, you know, in addition to also helping to move in and amongst the different communities. So thank you, Commissioner. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just bring you up to date a little bit on the MSTIP 3E program. That was the board's most recent program approval in October 2016. So we're coming up on about 5 years from that time period. And so the initial estimates were we were going to allocate revenues from roughly our fiscal year 2018-19 through the 22-23 fiscal year. We assumed about $175 million in total revenues. That comes out to about $35 million per year. So within that $175 million, we had $160 million that was allocated for 23 specific projects, and we'll have a map that shows those. We created some programmatic set-asides. One was $7 million for rural bridges, and that was actually a reduction from the MSTIP 3D, where we actually allocated $10 million for rural bridges in that program. And that's a need where there hasn't been a solid and readily available funding source for some pretty critical needs out in our rural communities. We actually allocated in the MSTIP 3E $7.5 million toward what's called the Opportunity Fund. And that was up from $5 million in the MSTIP 3D program. And that has proven to be a really successful program. And it essentially creates a pot of available matching funds for local communities here in the county that are applying for competitive grant programs, helps you to provide a local match. So both the county and a number of our cities have been extremely successful. And we so far have been experiencing about a 6-to-1 return on our investment. So for every dollar of opportunity fund that we've applied for local matching for the grants that we've been successful, we and the cities have been successful at securing, we're bringing in about $6 of external funding for every dollar of MSTIP opportunity fund that we've put in. So that's been a huge program, and that really has benefited a lot of our trail and bicycle and pedestrian projects. And finally, there's a $500,000 set aside for our intelligent transportation systems. And so those are basically smart and adaptive traffic signals that help us to streamline or move traffic on major corridors as efficiently as we can with the capacity, the physical capacity that exists there. So sequencing traffic signals, real-time adaptation of the signal system to try to help enhance traffic flow during busy peak hours. As I mentioned, most of our MSTIP 3E projects are already underway. Several have been completed, and we're continuing to press ahead with those projects. Next slide. So this is just a map that shows, again, I think the point here was really to illustrate one of the tenets of the program, because it is countywide property taxes, is we look with each allocation to try to help ensure that people around the county are seeing a return on that investment that they're making of their property taxes. So we typically have more projects, obviously, in urban areas. That's where the needs tend to be the greatest, but we have also a few projects in our small cities or in the rural area that are benefiting as well. And again, I think you see that we've achieved a pretty nice distribution of funding throughout the county there. Next slide. So when we went through this process for MSTIP 3E, the criteria that were being used at the time in terms of helping to solicit project nominations were things that improve safety, things that help with traffic flow or congestion on a major road that's used by many residents. So again, back to the sort of countywide nature of the funding. And then projects that are multimodal. So we want to make sure that we're meeting demands for people however they're traveling, whether it's on foot or on a bike or taking transit or in a vehicle. And then freight obviously is an important consideration as well. And as I mentioned, geographic distribution. Next slide. So those of you that have been on the WCCC for a little while, you'll remember this fondly. This is what we call the System of Countywide Interest. This is a map that was adopted essentially by the WCCC, and the intent of that was, while it's not a hard and fast eligibility criteria, it does help guide decision making and try to help identify what is that sort of countywide system that might be a priority for the funding that's available. And the map's a little bit hard to read, but if you peer at it very closely, and we'll get the presentation up online on the WCCC page. So if anybody wants to come back and look, it'll be there for you. So the areas where there are white lines in the middle of the color lines, that indicates that those are segments that have been improved. And so where you see sort of the solid color lines, those are some needs for improvement that have been identified but not yet funded fully. And so you see what we've made an awful lot of progress. We still have a long, long way to go. Next slide. So when we were doing this process that we're just embarking on for MSTIP 3F, the process when we did the MSTIP 3E, we kind of outlined these major milestones that you see on the slide here. So we checked in with the board for direction on our fundamental approach. We went through the process of soliciting projects and then doing the evaluation, relying pretty heavily on the WCCC TAC to help us with that. And then we got to, at that point, let's see, so after that second bullet, we had a list of projects that we were calling sort of the 400% list. So we had about 4 times, projects that totaled 4 times the amount of available funding that we knew we had. So the staff team worked pretty hard at doing some evaluation based on those criteria that were outlined in a previous slide, and trying to help winnow that down to a much more manageable size. So we got that down to 150% list, so 1.5 times the amount of available funding. We came back to the WCCC and the board. Both you and the board blessed that 150% list. We took that out for public comment and review, and used the input that we received back from that, along with further evaluation of the projects, to help refine that 150% list down to what we called the 100% list. And that was then brought forward to the WCCC, who recommended its approval to the board, and then the board adopted the program. Next slide. So I'm going to turn over to Chris at this point.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. That was a good introduction. And so what I'd like to cover is just how we propose to move forward on this next 3F until we have a better name, allocation. And first of all, fundamentally, we're proposing an approach similar that builds on what we've been successful in the past, with starting with broad guidelines for project selection with a focus on multimodal needs, and focus on the roadways of countywide significance. And that hasn't ever been hard and fast, but it does reflect that project is intended to have, a countywide benefit with countywide revenue, something that really reflects high local priority, as we hear from you and your community. And again, that focus on a geographically, financially balanced. We plan to work with you and with the TAC and your city representation. Again, seek public input on the priorities, recommendations for funding, and then revisit that programmatic set aside, see if there's any changes that are warranted to that approach. Next slide. We do, in thinking about this, we have come up with a few things that we think we could tweak some. One is that as we started to talk about this, and we have found how important it is, that the presentation Stephen just gave, how much history there is here and how many people weren't around in Washington County when this program started and the need to explain it and talk about it. And that we also realized we could benefit from a little bit better framing about what our overall goals are of the MSTIP in terms of desired outcomes that can begin to inform our approach and evaluation of the packages. And I'm going to go through each of these as we go through each of the milestones next. The second thing is more direct engagement. We are already invited by the Hillsborough Transportation Committee to come and share the overview, the history that we've done. And we think that there is probably an appetite among other city councils to better understand what MSTIP is and isn't. So we think there's an opportunity for some more direct engagement. Same thing with our community-based organization input. We have way more connections and engagement now that we can take advantage of with our communities within the county, and probably earlier to get their input on how we can engage them throughout this process early on. Same thing for the evaluation metrics. As the graphic showed, we have made a lot of improvements with MSTIP in our the equity focus areas. We now have more to back up our analysis of how these investments support equity. So that's a metric that we can refine. Same thing for public health. We've talked about safety improvements and active transportation, but there's some more we can do in teasing out a bit more the evaluation metrics. Cost assumptions, this has always been something that our team has worked really hard at estimating. It's something we know, certainly as you've all seen, how costs continue to escalate, that this is something we want to focus on and do what we can to get the most realistic expectations now that we have new design standards for bike lanes and cycle tracks and things, to make sure we're folding those in. And then, as we know, we're living in some uncertain times here. We want to continue to revisit those revenue forecasts as the work progresses and circle back in with that forecast. So what I'm going to talk about next is just the major milestones. Next slide. So again, it's pretty simple, like we had before. What we want to do now is confirm our work plan, both how to engage, how to evaluate the project solicitation process. And we want to hopefully circle back and have that pinned down in July. By fall, we would like to initiate that project solicitation process. And then by hopefully early winter, have gone through the evaluation to have a recommendation to release 150% list of the 150% of the funding list for public comment. And then by summer, be able to work through the WCC recommendation board adoption process. So those are the 4 simple milestones. And then next, a little bit about each one, a little bit more. Next slide. So in the first one, one question is, we have in our, as Stephen showed you that slide with chevrons on it, the project solicitation, the dedication of the MSTIP funding really follows upon the goals and objectives that were established in the transportation system plan. And so one of the things we'd like to explore is really focusing on introducing the goals of what we're trying to accomplish with this. By referencing those goals, our current transportation system plan identifies livability, the natural environment, which includes not only water quality, but also climate, economic vitality, and safety as the core goals, as well as, of course, applying an equity lens. So that's one thing we'd like to explore, is how we frame what we're trying to achieve with MSTIP. Then the second is to get to this confirmed work plan, is to circle back with you and get some input on how we engage with the community. And again, on these values and outcomes about what we're trying to achieve with this next allocation. Next slide. So the next milestone then is to initiate the project solicitation process. And what we No, we'd like to double check is those general guidelines for project solicitation. We generally being in your adopted local transportation system plan is a good sign that there's been local support for it and that it's gone through some review feasibility. We look at geographic balance and again, focus on that, what's of countywide significance. And also confirm those metrics for project evaluation. So we know how to evaluate the range of projects that come in and the and retool the metrics. At that early stage, we'll need to set an initial financial target for the projects and the programs and develop our, really work with you, your staff in the project solicitation approach. Next slide. Whitney, are you there? Yeah, there you go. And then with that evaluation, with the project solicitation, like Stephen said, we probably had 4 times the funding last time around. We're probably going to happen again. We'll need to go through that evaluation process, rely again on your staff for a multi-jurisdictional review, and then develop a thorough public involvement plan to solicit that input on the top priorities. Come to you as we did before for a recommendation on releasing of that 150% list, and same thing with the board approval in terms of a thumbs up to release the 150% list for public comment. Next slide. So for the board adoption process, again, we'll have a lot of public comment we expect to review, and we have completing additional evaluation. The board will, that'll be where the WCC will make a recommendation. We will want to circle back and confirm our costs and our revenues and develop that 100% project list to move forward, and any programmatic allocations. As Stephen said last time, there was a move to increase the opportunity fund. So there may be some other changes in that programmatic allocation, and then seek board adoption of the final allocation. So it sounds simple. Let's see, is there one more slide, Whitney? So it sounds simple, but it's going to be a lot of work, and there's going to be a lot of interest in this. And we are hoping to get input from you on questions about the process, things you'd particularly like to see now, and work with our TAC. We're a little off cycle. We were able to talk to the TAC verbally, but we'll now, after coming to you, we'll be able to spend some more time with the TAC on this and develop our approach for outreach in the community as well. Develop that draft work plan that we can seek direction on, and hopefully pin that down by July so that we can be off and running on the next phase. We expect there'll be regular check-ins over the next year as we move forward. Next slide. So questions for the WCCC. We'd like to hear a little bit about what you value in the process and what outcomes you really think are important, and what you think about some of the tweaks that we proposed in this process to think a little bit more about framing what the projects, what we're trying to achieve with the projects, as well as some expansion and engagement in the metrics and increased engagement with the community, and see if your city councils are interested in having more presentations and direct engagement. And again, those major milestones for check-in points for you and the board. And really also, does this approach seem to appear to allow for adequate input from you and engagement? Those are some of our key questions. And now, Steve, I think between Stephen and I think we've talked quite a while, and hope to hear some comment and questions.
Let me throw out a couple of questions. I don't see any hands up immediately. Oh, Ken, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I really like the idea of doing presentations with the city council. I would love for your team to present to our city council. I think that would be extremely helpful.
Okay, good.
A lot of thumbs up.
And I see Councillor Sansucci has his hand up as well.
Yeah, Mark. Oh, I sit there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the presentation. This is not the first time that you've talked to us about this, and it's not the first time that I've talked to you about this. Sort of to echo what Mayor Gibson said, and also things that I've said before, I think it's going to be really important for the cities to offer their perspective on how this kind of flexible funding source could best be applied to make life better for people in Washington County through transportation. I personally, I'll give you my opinions in a second. We're planning to have a meeting of our city council sometime in June, which may or may not be the same time that we invite you folks to come and present about MSTIP, but we are planning to develop a list of recommendations based on what Beaverton's priorities are for transportation, and intend to send that to county staff and to the County Board of Commissioners as our thoughts on what those outcomes and values of the program could be at this point in time. Obviously, there's a lot of time that's gone by since 1995 when the voters last chimed in on this. There's been a lot of evolution of what constitutes transportation need in our communities. And I think it's fair to say that while there will always be need for significant road expansion and intersection expansion projects, I think we've all in our cities identified the need for other kinds of things as well. The Opportunity Fund was one such. I know I personally advocated for that to be even larger than it has been and for us to work harder to make it more successful. But we've been studying things like local transit. We've been studying things in Beaverton. Certainly, we've been applying a lot of our money, I would say a majority of our money, to pedestrian projects, not to road projects. We have this new business coming at us of electric vehicles and charging infrastructure, which is something that could become a countywide activity. And then there's new technologies out there in the transportation arena that go way beyond what ITS is currently capable of. And significant investment in those things is something that could be contemplated here. So my thought is that, first of all, most of our transportation system plans are older. Ours was last updated in like 2009. We've adopted a number of other plans, like an active transportation plan, a context-sensitive design policy, revisions to our engineering design manual for our road standards. None of those are rolled up into our transportation system plan yet. So if this process simply starts with transportation system plans, it's missing all the work that's been done in the last 12 years. So that may be true of the county's plan as well. And I think that's one of the reasons why we would like and certainly hope that the board would consider the input from all of the cities as to what is today's set of urgencies? What is today's set of priorities? And it may be different from community to community. And because the funds are flexible, our hope is that the board and the county would consider being flexible in the application of those funds to projects in the different parts of the county. But that's what we're all here to discuss. Having said that, I just wanted to mention one other thing, which is that the map that shows the overlay of projects and the equity information is interesting. But I think it's really important for all of us to take a look at both research and best practices around the country that kind of show what kinds of projects advance equity and what kinds of projects hinder equity. Calling an improvement that takes place in a location something that improves equity is not necessarily a guarantee. You put a freeway through a long-standing old neighborhood, you have just reduced equity. So those kinds of things have to be considered carefully, I think. But I agree with your recommendations. The City of Beaverton is looking forward to providing a significant input into this process, including at the very beginning. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Jeff was next, and then Keith. Yeah.
I think Sansucci covered some of what I had to say, but others is the continued support of the equity of the distribution across the county, right? Things that we may need to do in Cornelius or Forest Grove right on the west end may be substantially different than what needs to be done with this money in Beaverton, right, or Sherwood. So I think that looking at the regional equity at each one of these steps is really important. I'd like to see us continue to do that. I also like the idea of continuing to reach maybe a little further into our councils and give them an opportunity as a council to provide feedback. Thank you.
And then I think it was Keith, and then I think Steve was after that.
Thanks, Roy. Thanks, Steve and team, for giving a great review of the fantastic results that we've been able to achieve the last 35 years of this program. It's a testament to our collective county leaders and staff. We are certainly the envy of our neighbors, and they still don't want to try to do something similar, but to their detriment. But a great job. Look forward to the future with this. It's important, I think, for us to remember to focus on things that impact us in the county system. We all individually have resources to deploy in our own community that are for neighborhood roads and stuff that wouldn't be considered part of the county grid. But the improvements to some of the multimodal stuff has been great. The Opportunity Fund has been great, and hope those things continue. Thanks.
Thank you. I think Steve was next.
Thank you, Chair. Great presentation. Really enjoyed it. A couple of questions. I think of the three-legged stool and, with gas tax, property tax, STCs. Is it possible that I know our gas tax obviously doesn't buy what it used to. Are our SDC charges keeping, I guess, pace with the SDCs in other jurisdictions? And that's not a question, a got you kind of question, but a more one, I guess, for just taking back and to see if we're still keeping that three-legged stool, with as even of legs as we can. So we know it won't wobble, but we still want it to be as level as possible, if that makes sense. And I was curious to know, what's the effective millage rate that goes into MSTIP right now? Because I know that when it was a standalone, and then when it was rolled in, what's been the millage rate that carries forward on that?
I'm going to turn that over to Stephen. I've been told that number before, but I don't remember it.
Yeah, there's not really a specific number, Mayor. It's a good question. And one thing we didn't touch on here today really is that we have the MSTIP bonding cost sharing projects that have been funded. And so when the board approved that program, they essentially set a fixed allocation to the pay-as-you-go program of about $35 million per year. And as property tax revenues are increasing over time, the board continues to allocate a roughly proportional share of total property tax towards this transportation need. So we're recapturing that incremental growth to help pay down the debt service on those bonded projects. And so the answer is that it's a somewhat variable number, if you will, over time, but the board has, I think, done a pretty good job of trying to sort of consistently apply a roughly similar proportional amount of overall property tax revenues into the MSTIP program. And I'd have to actually do some math to try to assess what that percentage looks like right now.
Okay. All right. A question for the milestone number 2 slide. It talked about project solicitation, but then hidden down below in the explanation is the word programs. And so all of a sudden it's like we're going from project, and then project and programs, and then it mentions projects again. And so when I think of programs, I think of the programs that we're going to be funded with Metro's transportation bond or levy. So is the county thinking of programs in a similar way? Was that a word that was just kind of used interchangeably, or are we specifically looking with future MSTIP funds to begin to fund things besides projects, and those would be programs similar to what Metro was looking at?
So might have been a little slip, but we have programs now. We have the Opportunity Fund is a program. We have the Rural Bridge program. We have the ITS allocation. And those have been pretty steady over the years, but like we
Okay.
said, we bumped up the up fund last time round, so it's a bit of a placeholder in case there are some more tweaks to that side.
Perfect. Thank you. I really appreciate that clarity. Then it mentions jurisdictional staff review team. And so since that team is already kind of planned for, who's going to be on it? How many will be on it? How will they be selected from the multiple jurisdictions?
That's a great question. In the past, we've relied on the TAC, and I have a note here. Erin Wardell is still on the call. We will be leaning on her and her team, as well as Joe Yonkins and his team, for a lot of the heavy lifting here throughout this process. So in the past, we brought the evaluation metrics and results to the TAC for review. It may be that we need to have special meetings for that, but we hadn't thought that far in terms. We just sort of assumed it'd be kind of a natural self-selection, but if we need to have more of a formal process, we could consider that.
Very good. Thank you. And again, my compliments to the two of you, because you've presented an MSTIP presentation that did not send Mayor DeLin's, heart rate, all over the place. So great job. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, we're right down to the end almost. We got the presentation, but I want to make a couple of really quick points. One, it's going to make me sound old. I was there at the very beginning. In 85, we did go out with a initial measure. It was not supported, and we were just trying to fix potholes. Then we went out with what you now see. It was about 25 or 27, as I recall. It had, we never envisioned it'd be 900 million worth of improvement. So it's been wildly successful. We owe a bit of thanks to Tom Bryan. And for those of you who don't know, and Tom was in the state legislature after he was mayor of Tigard, he got this as a permanent rate. And so that's why when Steve asked a question about, well, what's the rate? It's a little complex based upon the millage of the total of the misstep to our total millage is what we charge at the county. So you have to go through some gymnastics to figure it out. The 2 points or 3 points that I'd make real quickly is one, it was always envisioned that this would be a huge partnership between the cities and the county. Frankly, it's not county money, even though you ought to all be very aware that this money, even though the board continues to allocate it, this money could be used for our operations tomorrow if we wanted to. It's a part of the general fund levy. And so there's nothing that says it has to go for these transportation projects. So I hope that all of you during your tenure as mayors or councilors or respective roles will continue to push the county, make certain that that money is allocated to transportation. Because I think that's important. So you need to understand that. Secondly, this is like Social Security. If all of a sudden everybody stopped working, there wouldn't be any payments at the back end for the commitments that have been made. So I'm a little concerned because we all keep talking about new projects. Quite frankly, there's a whole bunch of projects that haven't been built yet and funded with cost estimates that may not be accurate as to what today's cost may be. And yet we're running into, well, let's go spend some more. I think, and again, because of my tenure, I won't be here when you start doing this, but I will do it at the county board level. Let's get some of the things accomplished that we committed to, plus that 1 billion, and you don't see other issues that need to be resolved. So let's get some projects completed and committed to before we start spending the next round. It's kind of like you got a bonus at work and you're out spending it, but you got all kinds of other bills and you're not covering them. I think that's really important to take a look at that. Mm-hmm. In addition to the program question that Steve, that you asked, programs are different. They can be different. And it's important that you understand completely what those programs are, because again, you've made commitments on projects in every area that have not been fulfilled yet. So what are these new programs and are they going to draw away? And the last question I'd address, and again, I think Steve, you were bringing up a series of them. You said, well, what's the developer cost in regard? We can debate that all day and we could spend 4 or 5 meetings on it, but there's another question, And it's been the one that's always kind of the, the big unspoken of comment. And that is a lot of this money is being spent in areas that are not incorporated, urban unincorporated areas that are built out. There isn't any more developer money. And so how do you feel about that? I mean, that's up to you as a city, but if we're taking money to retrofit things that didn't get done correctly in the past, do we raise developer fees in underdeveloped areas or yet to be developed, and then subsidize areas that aren't having either an LID or any other sort of costs associated to them to fix the problems that they are experiencing? So this is a very complex set of issues. There's a lot of hydraulics going, and I want you to be aware it's not as simple as let's just take and pick a bunch of new projects, and hopefully those projects that we saw around Hillsborough and Beaverton and down south and Sherwood and Tualatin are going to be kind of put to the end of the queue. I don't think you want that to happen. So I spoke too long, but I think there's a lot of other issues that need to be considered in this process. With that, quickly, impact, Pete.
Well, thank you. I don't have the formal agenda for the next meeting, which is coming up on the 26th, but that in the work program, it looks like the housing panel for cities and counties, the update on the 2018 UGB expansion for the cities that are interested in that, King City, Hillsborough, Wilsonville. I'm leaving somebody out there and I apologize. The previous meeting of impact dealt with the regional mobility policy update. Kim Ellis came to impact explaining that particular project. And then we also had the refinement of the Parks and Nature Bond refinement. That was introduced by Councilor Lewis, who talked about the provision of funds to Metro and regional partners through the local share of the bond program. So that's the history. And as I said, May 26th, housing and UGB expansion will be the items of the day. I think that's it.
Thank you, Pete. Steve, do you want to go over JPAC, please?
Sure, real briefly, coming up this month, we'll have our federal policy discussion. We'll be looking at the 2025 to 27 program direction for regional flexible funding allocation. And we'll continue our discussion on the draft mobility policy elements and potential measures. And then one thing I don't know how many were able to watch, Metro had a 2.5 hour webinar with experts from around the world, around the country, related to congestion pricing, mobility, and it is on their website. So if you get a chance, it's absolutely worth watching. Good discussion, good information, good questions. Thank you.
And Chris, you want to do the JPAC federal transportation policy agenda, but how much? We don't have a lot of time. We're way over.
Just to say that we forwarded to everyone the draft JPAC federal policy position paper. This is pretty much an annual thing, unusual this year, and that is going to be reviewed and acted on with the hopefully direction on the same day because of the tight federal schedule. They're really moving forward. So we distributed that to you last Friday, just in case you had any input that you wanted to share with and discuss to prep for that JPAC meeting. And, it's pretty much the same, asking for more stable funding and asking for more transit, priorities that are important to the region. But it also steps up to a new level, the emphasis on things like safety through the Orphan Highway Program, through for climate, through resiliency, and equity. So there's some more, a little stronger in some of those key areas for our region. Doesn't get too specific, But it does, is something that the region is on record for supporting.
Yeah, thank you. And you got my comments. It's
Yeah.
lacks a little bit of specificity, but okay. We're about at the end. I want to mention our next meeting is the July 12th. We're going to have it, and normally we skip one in the summer, so we'll see. Maybe we get out of the August 16th one. One of the things that we've discovered with me leaving the committee is that our bylaws are really out of date. There are things that we keep talking about the TIF, and that's been gone for a long time. We don't deal with how you replace people and all that sort of thing. So the county is taking upon themselves to redline, that's not the county in general, but Chris and Stephen, redline a proposal. And hopefully the process would be that we would send that out to you. You'd see it in June, at the June meeting. And then what would happen is after the June meeting, you'd add whatever comments you want, and we'd bring it back to July. So long process, a couple of months. I think that you'll see once you see their what they've done. It's just a lot of cleanup language, and is very good. So, but anyway, that's the process. We'll let you see it. They're going to send it out hopefully in the next week or so, and then in June, see if there's any discussion on it, and add whatever you want to add. And then in July, we would actually vote on it. So that's about 60 days. That's a long time to have your input. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Yes, Pete.
Yeah, I would just like to leave everybody with the news that Vienna Star opening an affordable housing project in Forest Grove, and they have decided to name it the Valfrey at Avenida 26. That's in honor of Val Valfrey, the former head of the Washington County Housing Authority and former counselor for us, and a very good friend to all of us in Washington County. So kudos to Vienna Star for doing that, and kudos to Val Valfrey for being around to accept it.
Yep, thank you for saying that. To Jeff, get well. We're all, our hearts are with you, and I hope you recover. And thank you, Steve, for sharing the sad news on. It's not any sad. I'm optimistic. Hopefully, Ralph will be turning up soon. But for those who remember him as a very robust individual, it's a sad situation. So, all have a good day. Sorry that we're over about 7-8 minutes. See you soon.
Get better, Jeff.
See you, everybody.
Thank you.
Steve, did you have something?
Oh, I just thought Mayor Gibson might have raised his hand. No?
No, I was just telling Jeff, get better.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Take care, everyone. See you tomorrow, Keith.
See you then.